Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by the two leaders of that new House Select Committee on China, Congressman Mike Gallagher and Raja Krishnamoorthi. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You have your first hearing on Tuesday. What is the message you both hope to send with it?
Well, first, let me say how excited I am to work with Ranking Member Krishnamoorthi. He is a hopeless Bears fan, but he is smart and clear-eyed when it comes to the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. And in addition to elucidating that threat, I want to send a message that the committee's work is going to be bipartisan. Speaker McCarthy wants to be bipartisan, and I firmly believe that besides its own people, what the Chinese Communist Party fears most is the idea of Republicans and Democrats working together to counter CCP aggression. Mm-hmm.
Well, the question is, can you maintain bipartisanship? The vote to create the committee was bipartisan, concerns bipartisan, but this spy balloon incident, things got very political very fast. How do you manage that?
Well, I echo the chairman's sentiments, and though he is a Packers fan, I am glad to work with him. Look, I think that you're absolutely right that the spy balloon incident quickly became political, and unfortunately, some folks on the other side took it as an opportunity to bash the president with regard to the Chinese Communist Party, even though on the whole, I think he handled it very well. Mike is right that the Chinese Communist Party likes nothing better than to have divisions between Democrats and Republicans. In fact, their chief political theorist, a guy named Mr. Wang Huning, has said that this is a huge weakness in America, that Democrats and Republicans don't get along. Mm-hmm. And so we have to get over that to be effective.
So help me understand the purpose of this committee, because you have the House Foreign Affairs Committee, you have the Intelligence Committee. This committee was particularly focused, as I understand it, on the Communist Chinese Party threat, including here in the U.S. So what is the extent of the activities here in the U.S.? I know you, Congressman Gallagher, have been looking at police stations, Chinese police stations on U.S. soil.
Well, I think the Chinese spy balloon incident illustrates perfectly that this isn't just an over-there problem. This isn't just a matter of some obscure territorial claim in the East China Sea. This is a right-here-at-home problem. This is a threat to our sovereignty. So yesterday, I went with a committee member, Democrat Richie Torres, to the site of one of these CCP police stations in the heart of New York, being used to harass and surveil Chinese dissidents. We then met with a group of Chinese students on American campuses that have been subject to harassment and in some cases physical assault. So we may call this a strategic competition, but it's not a tennis match. This is about what type of world we want to live in. Do we want to live in Xinjiang light, or do we want to live in the free world where we're free from fear, free to speak our minds, and free to choose our own future?
Xinjiang, you're referring to where there are concentration camps for Muslim minorities in China. When you talk about those police stations, 54 overseas police stations, according to the Spanish-based human rights watchdog. So help me understand how, the State Department says they don't like this. The FBI doesn't like this. How is that possible that this is on U.S. soil?
Well, unfortunately, there are certain nonprofit organizations that the Chinese Communist Party has used to try to do espionage and to crack down on Tibetans and Hong Kongers and Uyghur activists. And I'm very glad.
Living in America.
Living in America. In fact, my State of the Union guest was a Uyghur activist whose family has been imprisoned in China because she is speaking out against the genocide against Uyghurs in China. But one thing that I really want to bring to everyone's attention is that just at the same time that we are very concerned about the CCP going after Chinese origin people here, we have to make sure that in our conversations about Chinese origin people, we don't engage in any stereotyping or questioning people's loyalty. One of my colleagues, unfortunately, attacked Judy Chu, the first Chinese-American congresswoman in the United States Congress, saying that somehow she's not loyal to the United States. I find that offensive as an Asian American myself. And I want to hear Republicans also echo that sentiment that I just made, because we have to make sure that in our conversations in the committee, we stay out of xenophobia and we make sure that we keep the focus on the Chinese Communist Party.
In fact, this was a bipartisan agreement to create the committee, but House progressives voiced concerns because of what you just said. The vice chair of the Asian American caucus said they fear it'll feed into bigotry. So how do you stop your work from being distorted?
Well, I'd like to say that I'm hoping that the chairman will echo my sentiments with regard to Judy Chu and the attack on her. We can't go that route. Again, the Chinese Communist Party loves it when we are internally fractious and they like it when we are stereotyping. We have to avoid that, and we have to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for specific activities and deal with those.
I think he asked you to call someone out.
Well, let me say, we should not question anybody's loyalty to the United States. I think that is out of bounds. It's beyond the pale. If there are concerns about a specific organization, and as a matter of fact, the China Council for the Promotion of Peaceful Reunification is tied, directly subordinate to the United Front Work Department at the CCP, then we should work with our colleagues to apprise them that they might be targets for CCP United Front Work, CCP influence. As a former counterintelligence officer, I can tell you we are a soft target in Congress. But absolutely, we shouldn't question anybody's loyalty. And going forward, I think what's critical, and the reason we actually got the committee renamed to focus on the Chinese Communist Party, is to constantly make that distinction between the party and the people. And the people are often the primary victims of the CCP's aggression and repression.
So I read in the National Review that you are going to require all of those testifying to disclose foreign ties, not just to the Chinese Communist Party, but given how extensive the ties are in the business community, that there is really no difference, according to U.S. intelligence, between the state and the Chinese business community. Everyone's going to have to disclose this. I mean, how do you reassure people that this doesn't steer into Joseph McCarthy territory?
Well, Joseph McCarthy's from my district. He's buried in my district. We need not exhume his body and reanimate it. And I've written to the extent of we must constantly be aware of going overboard as we try and win this competition with China. That being said, there are disclosure requirements similar to that for most committees for testifying. Our bar is slightly higher given the nature of our work. I'm confident we can work through the complexity. But you're right. I think what makes this competition more complex in many ways than the old Cold War is we never had to contemplate selective economic decoupling with the Soviet Union because our economies didn't interact. This, in my mind, as sort of a military guy, is the most difficult area of competition. But we have to safeguard our own economy and make sure that we're not unwittingly financing genocide or PLA modernization.
The PLA is the Chinese military. So is it true you're calling in the NBA commissioner to testify?
We're hoping to have a conversation first with the NBA, with Disney, other companies that my constituents and others have voiced concern over. We haven't issued any announcement about hearings besides the one we're having on Tuesday night. But I think we can have a productive conversation with companies that have substantial business interest in China. And we want to make sure that the power of the Chinese economy is not seducing certain companies into betraying American values.
Can I just jump in?
And you have subpoena power.
We do.
Will you use it for corporations?
If we need to. I think if we want someone to testify and we believe their presence is essential to the committee function, I want to do it in a bipartisan fashion.
Okay.
I think at the heart of this committee, we do not have a quarrel with the people of China.
Yeah.
The differences that we have are with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and indeed, many of our businesses have ties with the Chinese economy. We're some of the most intertwined economies in the world. The challenge for our committee, indeed our country, is how do we continue to engage the People's Republic of China, but at the same time protect ourselves, our values, our interests, and our alliances with our partners and friends and others in the Indo-Pacific region.
And I imagine your issues with Disney and the NBA have to do with things like changing messages to censor things that can't be said that are critical? Is that it?
Well, the NBA incident, I think, caught a lot of attention because here you had an NBA executive who merely tweeted support for Hong Kong protesters. And remember, these people, in many cases, were out in the streets waving American flags. So they looked to us for leadership. And then the NBA quickly moved to silence that. So we just want to make sure that American companies are acting like Americans and embracing American values like free speech and plurality and things like that. So that's the concern.
Congressman Krishnamoorthi, I know that when you got back, Congressman Gallagher from Taiwan, you issued a statement that was pretty scathing in terms of a backlog, you said, of weapons to Taiwan. Do you consider there to be slowness on the part of the administration, or is this more of an issue with private industry just having such supply chain constraints right now?
I think it's a little bit of the latter. I think under the Biden administration and on a bipartisan basis in Congress, under the National Defense Authorization Act from the last Congress, we took unprecedented steps to provide additional armaments under the Taiwan Relations Act, under which we are obligated to provide articles of defense to Taiwan. But we need to do more, because what we know is that the CCP, as you said in your last interview with CIA Director Burns, wants to have the capability to successfully invade Taiwan by 2027, if not sooner. So that means we have to arm or help supply Taiwan's defense even more rapidly than we are right now. For instance, by working with private industry to unwind supply chains, introduce more competition into the mix to allow for smaller businesses and entities to provide more agile and nimble supplies of armaments. But the bottom line is we've got to hustle because at the end of the day, we want to discourage and deter aggression on the part of the CCP.
So you're saying your intentions here are coming from a genuine place. The concern for policymakers sometimes is that they get boxed in by politics.
Sure.
You know this. And everyone running for president in 2024 is going to vow to be tough on China. So how do you actually get something done in a space that's going to become really, really hot?
Well, I think we can identify sort of the bipartisan center of gravity on China. Listen, we're not naive. We're not going to agree on 100% of everything, and there's going to be meaningful disagreements within all the 2024 contenders. But I want both sides in some way to look to the committee as the area for the most forward-leaning, innovative, and bipartisan policy and legislation on China. And I think there are things we can do. When it comes to clearing the backlog, that's a bipartisan issue. It predates the Biden administration, to be sure. But I emphatically agree with what Raj said about if we want to prevent another collapse of deterrence across the Taiwan Strait, then we should be working to give Taiwan the resources and asymmetric weapons they need to defend themselves. So I think we can be effective in that regard. So
2 questions. You want to hold a hearing in Taiwan, I read. Is that going to happen? And can you get TikTok banned, as you both are trying to do?
Who goes first?
Yeah. Well, it would be technically you could do a field hearing in a foreign country. So, I've been to Taiwan. I think it's valuable for members to go there. I'm hoping to bring a bipartisan group at the appropriate time, and perhaps we could do a field hearing in Guam on the way back. But again, we have our first hearing on Tuesday. We're going to pass rules the morning of, so we got to crawl a little bit, then walk, and then maybe we can run with our fancy field hearings afterwards.
Is this the year TikTok gets banned?
I don't think it's going to get banned. I think what we're asking for is, TikTok is owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company that's required to provide its user data, including on the 140 million Americans, as well as control of algorithms to the Chinese Communist Party upon request. All we're saying is if TikTok is going to operate here, don't have that user data and algorithms controlled by an adversarial regime.
Understood. We'll be watching your hearing on Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentlemen. We'll be right back. The investigation of former President Trump in Fulton County, Georgia, took a strange turn last week, and Mr. Trump's lawyers now argue it could impact a possible trial. At the center of the controversy, Emily Kohrs, the forewoman for the special grand jury that investigated alleged election interference in Georgia by Trump and his allies. Kohrs gave several interviews in which she hinted that more than a dozen key players, perhaps even the former president, might have been recommended for indictments. Now, special grand juries can't indict, but that recommendation could prompt the district attorney to create a criminal grand jury. The judge overseeing the case told CNN last week that although the deliberations are confidential, quote, what witnesses said, what you put in the report, those are not off limits to those on the jury. The attorneys for President Trump in the Georgia case had not given an interview to any TV network, but the Kohrs media tour prompted them to talk to our Robert Costa.
I kind of wanted to subpoena the former president because I got to swear everybody in. And so I thought it'd be really cool to get 60 seconds with President Trump.
Did you recommend charges against Donald Trump?
I really don't want to share something that the judge made a conscious decision not to share.
Could Emily Kohrs' public disclosures jeopardize the case that could be brought by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis? Kohrs is part of a special purpose grand jury that heard months of testimony from more than 75 witnesses about alleged Republican efforts to pressure state officials like Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to overturn President Biden's victory in Georgia.
Look, Brad, I have to find 12,000 votes, and I have them.
Kohrs suggested the special grand jury submitted a report to Willis last month that recommended multiple indictments on a range of charges. But Willis has yet to decide whether or not to convene a criminal grand jury that could issue indictments against some Trump allies and even the former president himself. Drew Findling and Jennifer Little head up the former president's legal team in the Georgia case. They say that Emily Coors' media tour has tainted any attempt by District Attorney Willis to move toward charging Trump.
What are your options?
Are the results of that special purpose grand jury to be crumbled up like a piece of paper and thrown into a waste paper basket? Our options are, can this district attorney's office continue to be part of this case? We have to legally research all of those issues.
Have you lost confidence in the district attorney?
We've lost 100% confidence in this process. We feel this process has been compromised.
Emily Coors, they say, is not to blame.
This 30-year-old foreperson to us has actually provided us a lens and made us aware that every suspicion we had as to this questionable process was in fact a reality.
But she didn't break any rules, though, right? She may have broken a norm, but the grand jury was over by the time she went on this media tour, as you put it. So what did she do wrong, in your view, legally?
We have no chagrin towards this foreperson, and it looks like they lost perspective over keeping separation between prosecuting attorneys and the members of this grand jury. There cannot be a relationship. When the foreperson uses the word we, that lets you know there's a relationship there. When she says in interviews certain battles were not worth us battling, it's not the special purpose grand jury that's litigating, it's the district attorney's office.
She said it wouldn't be worth the battle. They decided to call your client in, former President Trump, in as a witness. That's the public statement she made.
Right, and who knows what that is based on.
He wasn't called in the special grand jury part of this investigation. Did that surprise you? And if he was called, would you have fought that subpoena?
I'm not going to speak to what our legal decisions would have been, but it was surprising, and particularly once we heard the reasons why he wasn't called. When we had our foreperson of this grand jury speaking about how excited and cool it would have been to be able to look at Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, for 60 seconds, but that they just determined that given the resources and the other witnesses that they had heard of, that they just didn't need to have any more evidence at that point. It's concerning that that was the level of diligence that was shown in that decision, and it was surprising, frankly.
If former President Trump is indicted, Willis can certainly expect a legal battle from Trump's lawyers.
We absolutely do not believe that our client did anything wrong, and if any indictments were to come down, those are faulty indictments. We will absolutely fight anything tooth and nail.
Willis and the district attorney's office declined to comment. For Face the Nation, Robert Costa, Atlanta.
And we'll be right back. Friday marked 1 year of the war in Ukraine, a sobering day around the world. Our Charlie D'Agata was in Ukraine when the war started, and he filed this report from Ukraine for us.
It's up to you. I was thinking that this is the front line.
We're taken to an unspecified frontline position north of Bakhmut. Two things about Ukrainian soldiers: they're really sensitive about sharing locations for obvious reasons, and they really don't want us to get hurt.
Это наши. Это наши стреляют.
Outgoing.
This friends.
Friendly fire.
Да.
Some incoming, some outgoing.
Да.
What do you want to do? This is the front line.
I know. Stay close to the building, they tell us. Split up. Russian mortar teams aim for people in clusters. One of the soldiers was a mortar guy himself and said if he was on the other side, he would have already launched a volley at us by now. So we hurry to get on with the job.
Okay, let's try one.
The sound of explosions has been non-stop, both outgoing and incoming. This is the last Ukrainian-held village before the Russian front line, about 3 miles in that direction. Commanders tell us the front line has only moved a few hundred yards in the past couple of months. In some cases, the soldiers are holding off the Russians using no more than automatic weapons. This is what a stalemate looks and sounds like.
We need to wrap soon.
Really?
Yes.
Is it getting that hot?
They're really worried.
The explosions haven't stopped the entire time that we've been here. Is it always like this?
Always.
Always. If it feels like the world is growing weary of this senseless war after a year of fighting, imagine how Ukrainians feel. We were here when the invasion began, when the capital itself was coming under attack, and each time we've returned, we've been shocked by the staggering and growing toll of the war. Even in virtual ghost towns like Staryi Saltiv in eastern Ukraine, the few residents who remain still manage a kind of life, sustained largely with the help of volunteers, food, and aid from around the world. Raisa Fativa survived the Russian occupation and the months of bombardment that followed when they pulled out and pummeled the neighborhoods. So this is when it began. This is the occupation. So May, June, July, August, September. Getting aid to the other side of the river is more difficult. The Ukrainians blew up the bridge, forcing the Russian retreat. This temporary pedestrian bridge will do for now. They don't want to allow vehicles to cross in case the Russians try to come back. The sheer sadness and unnecessary suffering can be overwhelming. Just over a year ago, most of this country was at peace. Overnight, the entire country was at war. A brutal war with no end in sight.
Charlie D'Agata reporting from Ukraine. We'll be right back. The cleanup continues following that toxic train derailment that happened more than 3 weeks ago, but the EPA has ordered railroad operator Norfolk Southern to pause shipments of hazardous waste out of East Palestine. They will eventually resume, but under the oversight of the EPA. Meanwhile, CDC is on the ground as concerns linger about any long-term health effects from chemical exposure. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.